Good afternoon. I just want to post a short video, hopefully, that just connects some dots as to why I'm posting the last two videos. One reading from When the Church Harms God's People by Diane Langberg, and then also reading from Nigel Tomes, writing about the teaching of authority and submission in the Lord's recovery being heretical and being very damaging. The main thing I want to make clear is I'm addressing systemic abuse, and that systemic abuse is protected by the teaching that God has a deputy authority who only answers to God, not to anyone else. And that deputy authority may not be representing God because there may be unrighteousness, there may be sin, there may be abuse going on, and yet all of the people, quote, under that deputy authority are not allowed to speak out. And if they do, they are ostracized, excommunicated, labeled as rebellious, shamed, silenced, etc. And I've experienced this on a personal level, on a family level, the family being mainly with my in-laws, in my marriage, and then also in the wider environment of my church community that is known as the local churches, the Lord's Recovery, etc., with believers with whom I am no longer gathering at this point because I was not safe. And this book is just so good that I thought I would read just a tiny bit more from it. But sometimes a system created to do good becomes a mechanism for doing evil. Diane Langberg writes, this has happened. She mentions with a lot of institutions, including banks, governments, families, legal systems. The good services for human beings are, in fact, used in ways that harm people. Okay, so the self-interest of a system is paramount. The goal, often unstated, is to protect the system rather than its constituents. And so these teachings on delegated or deputy authority, teachings on submission, teachings on covering Noah, not being like Miriam, who criticized Moses. These teachings basically protect a system and its leaders rather than the constituents. Okay, so Diane goes on with a picture from the physical body about an autoimmune disorder where the body attacks itself rather than protecting it. The body is attacked by its own protective mechanism. Cells in the body are seen as foreign, and the consequences can be disastrous. And I have written a blog about this, so it was nice to find her writing about it as well, that I feel like what I've experienced is an autoimmune dysfunction where what should be nurturing and taking care of itself, the body with all its members, is actually attacking members. When systemic abuse occurs in an organization that theoretically has a good purpose, the overt or stated purpose is in fact not the governing one. For abusive conduct to be perpetuated by agents of a system, that conduct must be facilitated by fundamental, though often hidden, properties of the system. In other words, there is a predisposition or a susceptibility to abuse that is built in at some underlying level of the system's architecture. This is an autoimmune disorder within. Okay, so in which case, there's abuse and victims are silenced. And, a person does not become abusive to others overnight. Matthew 24:12 says, because lawlessness will be increased or iniquity abounds, the love of many will grow cold. Abuse begins when I do a mean or heartless thing to a fellow human being. Abuse begins when I malign a person more easily today than yesterday. The conscience ceases to upbraid eventually, and sin brings death. Okay, so systemic abuse does not happen overnight. It creeps in little by little. We must not become numb to it. We need to wake up, see abuse in the church for what it is, call it by its right name, and stand against it in whatever form it may take, bringing light and life rather than darkness and death to the least of these. Okay, so she, as a therapist, discusses a lot of the ramifications or the results of abuse to its victims. But okay, so that's to follow up with that book. That I have a lot of personal connections with this book, and I'm so thankful. Thank you to Diane Langberg for this book. Thank you to Julie Roys, whose website offered it. In the Lord's Recovery that I grew up in, there was also just there was that stress of spiritual authority and of God's government. And I remember praying for a brother in a prayer meeting when I was in the full-time training. So I was in my young 20s, and I prayed for a brother, and I was rebuked afterwards by somebody who said, "You prayed for somebody who has touched God's government." So that I think he said, I deadened the prayer meeting because I mentioned the name of a brother who had been an elder among us and who left because of the lack of judging of and dealing with sins. It was Godfred Otute. And I was rebuked for praying for him, saying that he was one who touched God's government. If you knew Godfred, you would know he's a very righteous man. And he was trying, along with John Ingalls and Al Nock and others, to address matters of gross sins taking place in the Living Stream Ministry office. Okay, so that was using God's government to basically tell me I shouldn't pray for someone. And then in marriage, I was told, and I've mentioned this before, but I was told by someone I really respect that Brother Lee would teach, if a husband is driving toward a cliff, all a wife needs to do is just submit and just stay quiet, and the Lord will move the cliff. This is a very, very, very dangerous teaching because, okay, sorry, I'm getting messages. Okay, so then in marriage, I've been mistreated to the point that, police have told me that I'm being treated illegally. Multiple therapists have told me this is severe abuse, and colleagues just can't believe how I'm treated, and some of them may not even be believers in Christ, and they're just shocked and saying, why in the world are you going through this? Why are you being treated this way? But my situation, including being sent away from my home, just is a very small example of the abuse of power, abuse of authority. Brothers in the church, quote, in the church, senior co-workers, have done the same, but in a spiritual way, of sending brothers away from their home, telling them they are barred from meetings. I am asking right now for whoever is a responsible one in the, quote, Lord's Recovery in the local churches to stop banning Steve Isett from meetings. He is not negative. He will speak the truth in love, but he only speaks the truth. So please stop banning him from church meetings. He did not sin. The way that you all, some of you, condemn others is you condemn them if they are speaking in a way that will, quote, unsettle the saints. But the reason it is unsettling is because saints have been lied to by the leaders. And so if any of us, any of us question that or say, no, there's abuse going on, then we're looked at as negative. So please lift the ban. Please let Steve Isett meet freely with the Lord's Recovery if he wants to, because he still absolutely loves the local churches, the Lord's Recovery, everything that's healthy about it. He doesn't love the sin, of course. Okay. So multiple brothers have been labeled as rebellious when they actually were just addressing gross sins. Um, let's see. So brothers who to this day who are addressing lies and abuse are themselves then lied about and abused. This is the pattern. It's the systemic autoimmune disorder in the body. Okay. Sisters, as I've mentioned in another video, are shamed and silenced by the ministers, quote, quote, the ministers of the age in the Lord's recovery. But both Watchman Nee and Witness Lee were saved through the speaking of sisters. And both of them, but especially Watchman Nee, was very, very much cared for in his spiritual life by M.E. Barber and by other sisters. And sisters were his co-workers. But we know he didn't treat sisters properly, and we know by proxy Witness Lee also did not treat sisters properly because he knew his son was sexually assaulting sisters, and he did nothing but move those sisters away, if anything. So these are some of my connections to my last couple videos about spiritual authority, authority and submission being a teaching that is attributed to the Godhead, to the triune God, that he, in essence, was the first to establish authority and submission between the Father and the Son. Anyway, heretical. It's heretical and it's dangerous because that then becomes this, quote, divine principle by which leaders cover up sins. So twisted, so dangerous, so unscriptural. Thanks for listening.